Welcome to Crossroads. The United States is moving forward with plans to prepare for a potential war with the Chinese Communist Party. Now, satellite photos show that U.S. troops are now reclaiming a Pacific Island airfield from World War II, notably one of the ones that was used to launch the nuclear attacks on Japan at the end of the war. Now, this aligns with recently announced strategies that the United States would establish a network of airfields through the Asia-Pacific region and then staff them with troops who are trained to fill multiple roles. This is happening as global conflicts are expanding in the Middle East, in Latin America, and Europe, and also elsewhere. Now, first on this particular airfield. This is located on the remote island of Tinian, one of the three principal islands of the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands and administered by the United States, technically a U.S. territory. Now, Tinian is under 40 square miles in size and located approximately 1,500 miles south of Tokyo, something that was of strategic value during World War II, when the island was the launching point for two U.S. bombers, again, that dropped the atomic bombs in the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And now U.S. troops are looking to reclaim an airfield on that island. Newsweek said this: an overgrown airfield on a small island in the Pacific, once instrumental in America's role in ending World War II, is being reclaimed by the U.S. Air Force as it prepares for a possible future fight with China. And notes the island is in a similar distance to China and other flashpoints in Asia, with the U.S. Defense Department plan costed at nearly $500 million, now preparing it to help the United States deter or defeat the Chinese military. And notes that after the Allies captured Tinian in 1944, the U.S. Navy immediately began constructing what was the world's largest air base at the time. And notes that in August 1945, Northfield, at that place, launched the two bombers that carried out the first and only wartime use of nuclear weapons in human history. The dropping of atomic bombs, Little Boy and Fat Man, on Japan effectively ended the war and spared American troops from a bloody and costly invasion of the Japanese mainland to force the empire's surrender. Notes that more than half a century later, unused and in disrepair, Northfield, one of the two there, is being brought back to life under an Air Force operational concept called Agile Combat Employment, or ACE, which disperses units and capabilities into smaller groups. And notes that under the Pentagon's Pacific Deterrence Initiative, which puts China's multi-domain threat at the forefront of U.S. defense planning, 3 projects will add airfield operations to Tinian for refueling, takeoff and landing, and parking, all in support of operations in the vast Indo-Pacific theater. Now, U.S. Air Force senior leaders actually visited the Mariana Islands on ACE trips in April of this year. They went to Tinian, they went to Saipan, they went to Guam, 3 U.S. territories, right? Now, this is the Secretary of the Air Force Public Affairs in April. They said that while in the Mariana Islands, the senior leaders met with elected officials as well as airmen who are expanding Agile Combat Employment capabilities, ACE, in the area. Now, note that on Tinian, the senior leaders observed the adaptive rehabilitation work being done in the Northfield in support of ACE. The airmen there are restoring over 20 million square feet of degraded World War II pavement so that ultimately the rejuvenated runway can serve as a power projection platform. Power projection notably in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, we discussed this ACE concept before. This looks like a strategy designed to fight back against the CCP's Assassin's Mace strategies. Now, what is the Assassin's Mace? The Assassin's Mace is a Chinese Communist Party strategy meant to basically blind and take out the key enabling factors of the U.S. military. It means taking out our satellites. It means rapid attacks on the things that enable our fighting force. Rather than trying to take out America's jets, they want to take out America's airfields so the jets can't take off in the first place. Rather than take out America's missiles and take out our troops and so on, they want to take out the satellites that allow for communications and missile guidance. They want to take out the systems that are the eyes and the ears of our military, make it so they can't communicate, so they can't find where they're going, and make it so that we can't use the assets that they can't fight against if they were to take it from the front. And so the Assassin's Mace strategy uses all these different asymmetrical weapons, all these asymmetrical concepts. And the other side of it is, of course, rapid attack, destroy the key capabilities, do surprise attacks, bring America to its knees, and bring them to the negotiating table maybe within a week or 2 weeks. That is what the CCP's war plan against America would look like. What is interesting with this new plan the U.S. is doing, though, the focus they have on that region, the building of these pop-up bases, the entire A strategy, looks like it's designed to try to disable some of the key components of the Assassin's Mace strategy. Now, this airfield in Tinian also has historical significance. It's likely the Chinese Communist Party is taking its role in Hiroshima and Nagasaki as an indirect threat also from the United States. Now remember, one of the big threats coming out from China and Russia and North Korea now is nuclear threats. The entire CCP kind of axis that's emerging right now, one of the deterrents they're using to prevent, for example, the United States from intervening too strongly in the war in Ukraine, from stepping in too far in the Arctic, from coming in too hard when it comes to Russia and North Korea and the CCP working together in their region, is they keep making nuclear threats. They're using nuclear threats as the deterrent. And so what is the U.S. doing? Well, it's putting up missile defense systems all around these areas. It's putting missile defense systems in Europe, despite Russia's threats against that. It's putting missile defense systems now in Japan, now in the Philippines. Possibly they might even try to get them back in South Korea, which caused a big diplomatic issue between South Korea and China previously. But if they build up these bases and defense systems on U.S. territories, Guam, Saipan, Tinian, that means the U.S. is also expanding its reach within that area to create a kind of deterrent against the deterrent, so to speak, to make it so the CCP would not be able to use that type of threat. And now also, right, the Asia-Pacific region is increasingly becoming a hotspot in this expanding kind of global conflict we're now watching. Russia is even holding show-of-force operations alongside the Chinese Communist Party in that region. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break. Welcome back. The Asia-Pacific region is increasingly becoming a hotspot in this whole global conflict we're now watching. Now, Russia is even holding a show-of-force operation alongside the Chinese Communist Party in that region. This past week, in fact, ships from both Russia and China have conducted missile and naval artillery firing exercises as part of the Ocean 2024 drills. These exercises span the Pacific and Arctic Oceans to the Mediterranean and are considered one of the largest post-Soviet military exercises. This included ships from Russia's Pacific Fleet and Chinese Navy vessels. And it's important as well because they launched it off the eastern coast of Russia to an extent as well, which has implications against Alaska and into the Arctic region, as we briefly mentioned, which they've again, Russia and China, have been even, for example, flying bombers into the air defense zone of Alaska, directly threatening the United States by doing so. Now, Reuters said this. They say Russia's defense ministry said those drills were part of much larger maneuvers involving more than 400 Russian warships, submarines, and support vessels in the Pacific and Arctic Oceans and the Mediterranean, Baltic, and Caspian Seas. A very large operation in many different parts of the world. They note that China's official Xinhua news agency said on Monday that the aim of the exercise with Russia was to deepen the, quote, level of strategic coordination between the Chinese and Russian militaries and enhance their ability to jointly respond to security threats, meaning, again, part of their defense pact with each other. Now, interestingly, we're also now seeing Western European countries holding show-of-force operations there as well, something that's also a big shift for them. Politico said this. They said China's military on Saturday criticized the transit of 2 German Navy ships through the Taiwan Strait, saying it increased security risks. And as Beijing's forces had monitored and warned the vessels it added, and the Taiwan Strait, it says, is a major trade route. Germany says, hey, we're not doing military threats with this. We're just taking the shortest route. And given the fact this is a major trade route, of course, we have to go through it. The Taiwan Strait, as it notes, is a major trade route. Several countries' military ships use the waterway, including the United States. But this is the first time in 2 decades that Germany's Navy has done so. This is according to German media reports. And that's the German ships were traveling from South Korea to the Philippines while doing this. Now, again, Germany can say, hey, this is just part of a freedom of navigation operation. This is a major tradeway. We have to go through it. We're taking the shortest route. The really important part, though, is that Germany doing this freedom of navigation operation is also being framed in the context of NATO, given that Germany is a NATO member. And remember the context of that. When it comes to Russia and Ukraine, and of course the war taking place in that region of the world, that's becoming a direct threat against NATO. And many countries in that area, notably, are trying to push back against it. They've now determined, including with the United States and NATO, that the Chinese Communist Party is one of the key enablers of that war. Meaning that if they're going to end that war, China, the CCP, is the main factor they have to focus on. Disabling that support network means bringing an end to that. And so they're pushing back now not just against Russia, but also against the CCP. And notably, Russia's move to the Asia-Pacific region as well is also in this context, and also that Russia has a no-limits agreement with the Chinese Communist Party. The two of them have agreed basically to defend each other and support each other through all means. And in addition to this, the Chinese Communist Party and Brazil, under Lula now, are trying to push a peace treaty for Russia and Ukraine. And notably, interestingly, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is openly now rejecting the Chinese Communist Party's proposal. Reuters said this: President Volodymyr Zelensky has dismissed a Chinese-Brazilian peace initiative for the war in Ukraine as destructive and complained that Kiev had not been involved in the process. They note that Zelensky said the initiative lacked respect for Ukraine and its territorial integrity. Now, look, this is important because Ukraine had been holding meetings with Chinese Communist Party leadership on this proposal. But it now seems the CCP's proposal, well, it's not a lot different from what Russia wants to gain in the war in the first place, right? Something in favor of this whole global axis, so to speak. And they're viewing it basically that agreeing to the CCP's terms are like surrendering to Russia in the first place. Now, this is also in context of Ukraine now having something to bring to the negotiating table. One of the big problems Ukraine had previously in terms of making a peace deal, of ending the war, was they didn't really have any cards to play. They were purely on the defense. Ukraine is now going on the offensive. It's now begun invading Russian territory, and it's working on getting approval, notably, to fire long-range missiles into Russia, something Russia is threatening back, saying they might even strike the West, including possibly with nuclear weapons, if they allow this to happen. Now, given this, the United States is also pushing for Europe to turn its sights not just on Russia, but on the bigger conflict now brewing. The war taking place again between Russia and Ukraine and the threats being levied against NATO through that are just one part of a global picture. And the U.S. focus right now is trying to get European allies to recognize and even take part to an extent in this whole global picture. And this especially ties into the key enabler in all this, the Chinese Communist Party. Now, Reuters said this. They said the United States is urging its European partners to be more forceful in expressing their disquiet about China's growing defense collaboration with Russia, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell said on Tuesday. And it's a Campbell who has met Belgian, NATO, and EU officials from Monday, said he had provided allies with details of China's substantial support to Russia's military-industrial base and the consequences on the battlefield in Ukraine. In other words, again, they're saying that the CCP is basically behind this to an extent. They say much of the support was provided covertly. Campbell said that simply watching more carefully certain financial institutions and making this clear could have significant consequences as China and Russia were attentive to the financial system and worried about potential steps against them. And as a Russian help to perfect certain military capabilities for China would also have an important negative and concerning impact on other nations in the Indo-Pacific region. Campbell said the United States, the EU, and NATO partners were increasingly aligned on China policy. In other words, you have two separate factions forming globally. There's the Chinese Communist Party's faction, and there's the United States-led faction, which includes NATO and most of Europe, and even a lot of countries like Japan and Australia and others. The world is dividing basically into two different factions. You have the new Axis, and you have the new allies. Now, Italy, interestingly, is also warning what's at stake for Europe as a whole. Now, AP said this. It said Italy's foreign minister Tuesday voiced strong support for Western Balkan countries' European Union accession bids, saying that otherwise the region could swing towards Russia or China. Basically, a lot of these former Soviet satellite states want to join the EU because Russia, of course, is threatening to take them over. That is one of the previous red lines established by Russia. It still claims to an extent some type of sovereignty or ownership over the countries in that region. These countries don't want that. And they want to join Europe. They may even want to join NATO. Russia's saying that's a red line. Now note that speaking during a visit to North Macedonia, Antonio Tajani said the bloc should lend a hand to those peoples who want to be with us Europeans. If we don't do that, there will be someone else who wants to replace us. I mean Russia, China, and other parts of the world. I mean Turkey, Tajani said. Now this is important notably because his statements have some extra significance. Italy has been working more closely with the Chinese Communist Party on the economic front. And this shows, though, that despite the business deals, despite those types of relationships, politically and on the defensive front, Italy is still maintaining a pretty strong stance against the CCP and its interests and what it's trying to do on the other side. You know, one of the things the CCP often does is it uses economic interest, financial interest, as the wedge to get into countries and then expand political influence. And Italy, not allowing those economic deals to influence the political side, is taking a pretty interesting stance against that. Now, the CCP's operations into other growing conflicts is becoming significant as well. Another key conflict, notably, is the war between Israel and Hamas. And that is now expanding to include Lebanon and also the whole global Hezbollah terror network. Wall Street Journal said this. It said pagers carried by thousands of Hezbollah operatives exploded at about the same time Tuesday afternoon in what appeared to be an unprecedented attack that authorities said injured more than 2,700, they say more than 4,000 now, and killed at the time 8 across Lebanon. And notice the affected pagers were from a new shipment that the group received in recent days. People familiar with the matter said. And notes as well, a Hezbollah official said many fighters had such devices, pagers, speculating that malware, computer viruses, might have caused the devices to explode. It says the official said some people felt the pagers heat up and disposed of them before they burst. But further it states, Hezbollah and the Lebanese government blamed Israel for the attack. Both said civilians were killed, and Hezbollah threatened to retaliate. Now notes the Israeli military declined to comment, but Iranian state television said the country's ambassador to Lebanon was also injured by his pager, but was conscious and not in danger. Now notes that Iran is the main supporter of Hezbollah, a U.S.-designated terror group that has grown into one of the world's best-armed non-state militias. Now, Hezbollah is a global terrorist network. It has very large networks, not just in that region of the world, but even throughout Latin America. In fact, they even have political parties in Latin America. They could also pose a terror threat in the United States, mainly because of those open networks. And also elsewhere in Europe, a lot of that because, again, of the relative open border policies that brought a lot of people from those regions into these countries. Now, there, just like elsewhere though, the CCP is also playing a very heavy role. The Chinese Communist Party notably is very close to Iran. Iran has a huge part of the involvement with Hezbollah. The CCP is also working to unite Palestinian factions, including Hamas, in the context of the terror group's war with Israel, because the CCP there, just like in Ukraine, is trying to have negotiating power. It wants to have its view of the world and its goals for the world instituted through these conflicts. Now, as things currently stand, Israel is warning that time is running out for a diplomatic solution with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Hezbollah, again, if they start a war with that, that could very quickly turn into a global terrorist war. Israel is also warning the Houthis in Yemen that they may retaliate against them because they keep launching attacks into Israel. And it's even possible that Iran could get more directly involved in this growing conflict. And again, all this is tied together. There's even bigger parts of this as well. The CCP is now getting heavily involved with governments throughout Latin America and Africa. It's also trying to expand its roles in various Pacific Island nations. And in Latin America, notably, the CCP is working more closely with Brazil. Notably, Lula is back in office, and his administration was closer to China than was the United States. In Venezuela, the Chinese Communist Party is endorsing Maduro as the country's leader, while the United States, the U.S., is backing the opposition party, and they're saying Maduro seized control of the country unofficially in the recent election. Then there's also the CCP and Russia's push into the Arctic, something also of a U.S. concern. Notably as well, that's kind of deemed as the strategic high ground. If China or Russia were to launch nuclear attacks or an air attack, they'd probably go through the Arctic to hit America. And in all these conflicts, it's important. Other countries are more closely aligning with the United States and its allies to push back against the Chinese Communist Party. There now, as the CCP makes threats against different countries throughout the Asia-Pacific region, within these Pacific Island nations, throughout Africa, throughout, again, Latin America. Even when it comes to the conflicts now, Ukraine is now pushing back against the CCP. Israel is pushing back against the CCP. They're forming now these two different sides in what is becoming, again, a global conflict. And interestingly, the trend right now is that these conflicts are going to likely grow. It's in the trend of growing, not contracting. And it's also in this context that the United States and its allies are looking as the Chinese Communist Party as the key shared factor in all of this, whether it's the terror war, whether again it's the conflict happening right now around Israel and the surrounding countries, whether it's, for example, Ukraine, whether it's the Asia Pacific. The CCP is the key enabler, the key factor. In addition also to the pushback on the defense front, it seems they're also viewing the CCP's economy as the weak point for the CCP, and the sanctions, the tariffs, the general decoupling now taking place, that is also having an effect on fighting back against the Chinese Communist Party through other means. Well, everyone, that's all for today. Thank you for joining us. Let me know what you think in the comments. Also, please help share this video, help us get the word out. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.